The story's over. At least for me it is. I've laid out all the details. I've told you about the temptations we faced and the jobs we pulled, and how each of my friends passed away, murdered, disappeared. I'm a sole survivor. Florida is a dead man's paradise. It's filled with lost souls who are unable or unwilling to walk toward the light. In. They're starting to anyway. My life, doctors, testing, pills, and everything I can't have. I don't know. When temptation came calling, I didn't hesitate. I made this painting for my sister, gave it to her for a Christmas present. She liked it, framed it, and hung it on her dining room wall. When I first saw the painting hanging there, I thought, that don't look too bad. I think I'll try another one. And I did. 20 years later, I'm still painting. Not everything I did was perfect. I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I probably ruined every painting I started and had to start over. The first art lesson. The first art lesson I ever got took place in kindergarten. My first day of school. I was sitting at a little round table with 4 other kids. We were each given a piece of paper and a box of crayons. I took the black crayon out of the box. I colored the entire page black. Afterwards, the teacher came up to me and said, "That's very interesting, David. What is it?" I said, "That is fog. Fog." It was that day that I learned the importance of giving every work of art a name. Even if fog sounded like an excuse, it was still a name. The universe was a gourmet restaurant disguised as some rundown 50-ish diner. Burgers, fries, and a Coke ran about $50. I'm glad Willie was paying for this. I never would have thought to come here. Villie didn't want to talk about the job. He just slid me an envelope. I read the letter with its cryptic remarks, signed by all 6 of the girls. The place was empty. The only thing that lingered, besides their absence, was the strong smell of disinfectant. A forensics crew would be hard-pressed to find fingerprints or DNA on the scrubbed surfaces, floors, walls. The question that hung in the air: where were they? Where had these little girls gone? For what reason had they come to the United States? Another question mark that led to empty space. In my dealings with Villie, I tried not to know too much. I didn't ask questions. However, on one or two occasions, he said some things that filled in a few blanks, like moving furniture into an empty room. He said once, "What if you took everyone between the ages of 18 and 30, put them in a bowl, mixed them up, and sprinkled them out over the face of the earth, some landing here and some there? Could such an action bring peace to our troubled planet? Such a rearrangement?" I didn't know. It seemed to me this rearrangement that Villie spoke of happened naturally. People move themselves from one place to another. For young people, it was called going to college or joining the service or being deployed. People had all kinds of reasons to move. As far as I knew, these girls hadn't voluntarily come to the United States. Volunteers don't travel locked in steel packing crates. Villie said they didn't have passports and couldn't leave a record of their travels. Oh, beware the man who has all the answers. They were financed, he said. This is what he told me, and this is unbelievable. They were financed, he said, by a small but extremely wealthy group of businessmen. He called them the puppet masters. I asked him, do they have names, this wealthy group of businessmen? Villie said no. At least he didn't know what their names were. I asked, where are the girls? Villie said again, I don't know. I must have flashed that disgusted look, and you gotta be kidding. Villie sat up, pointed a finger at me, and said, those billionaire businessmen are the reason we were not arrested after pulling that job. They were the reason, he said, you were not pulled over on your way to the graveyard. I said, yeah, remind me to send them a thank you note. What's their address, by the way? Stop, Villie said. He put his hand up as though he were stopping traffic. By the way, your story jumped the shark at a small group of extremely wealthy businessmen. You're probably dealing with a group of who knows what you're dealing with your own insanity. He asked me to stop again, this time holding up both hands, palms out. He looked pathetic. It was then I knew I needed to get out of town, put some distance between me, myself, and this cartoon character. I bought an airline ticket and traveled 2,000 miles to try and put these bad memories and bad deeds behind me. But they stuck to my back like a pile of wet sticks. I tried to remember and relive every moment from the time I met Villie until right before I left on this trip and our regrettable conversation. And they even invite him to Mexico to this big party and fix him up with a couple of women and, all this. I found myself being ashamed, really ashamed of all the useless conversations that I had had with whoever. Villie didn't entertain those kind of conversations. He wanted to talk about my art. He seemed to really like it, and he was willing to pay good money for it, which I couldn't have been happier. We were having dinner at some place when he made an offer. He asked me if I'd be interested in driving a van. A couple hours a day, here to there, paid $2,000 a week. He knew my art wasn't selling that well. He knew I would say yes. Yeah, it was a good offer. Suddenly, I was going down. Rosa told me one night while we were driving from the hotel up to the cabin, she said, we used to wait in our rooms and listen for footsteps in the hallway. Sharp, high heels coming toward our door. Rosa was the only girl that actually gave me any information on what happened once they were dropped off at the hotel each morning. I've got it written down. I'm going to read some of it. Some of it's her words, some of it's mine. But this is what went on. When we were dropped off, she said, we were separated. Each of us were locked in a separate room. From there, we waited for the nurse to come by. We waited to hear the clicking of her heels on the tile floor outside the room. She would enter our room with a lab coat and a black bag and begin by taking our blood. After that, she said she would swab the inside of our mouth for saliva. This was placed in a test tube. She scraped under our fingernails and cut our fingernails if she thought they were too long. Those were also placed in a sample jar. She tested our blood sugar levels. And then she checked our scalp for lice. She even cut a lock of hair off and put that in a jar as well. All these samples, she said, all these samples she took from us were placed in test tubes or tiny jars. Our names were written on each test tube or jar. The last thing we were asked to do was to give a urine sample, pee in a cup. All these samples would be stored, she said, in a database. She told us they would make the seeds of humanity. We were the first seeds. Today, the 5th day, the nurse didn't come. Instead, they sent a hairdresser to do our hair for us and a photographer to take our picture. We were not allowed to put on makeup. I asked Rosa what she thought of the process dealing with a nurse and all the testing, all the samples taken. And she said, and I quote, I'm reading now, "They were taking something from me that didn't belong to them." I wish my parents had never paid for me to come here. I asked them how come then they had arrived in a packing crate. She explained they only got in the packing crate when it was time for the pilot to come on board and guide the ship into the dock. We weren't in the packing crate for more than 3 or 4 hours. On the trip over, we all had rooms we slept in. That's what she told me. That's the information I got.
Yes, it is a short story that I was writing. Hey, why don't you read it to her?
Oh. Sarah, did you need sugar?
I used the rest of the other.
Oh.